Amen. Amen. What a blessing it is to be gathered here as one region and to hear this wonderful music we've had today and to hear God's Word. Our scripture reading this morning comes from the book of Titus. It is chapter 1, verses 4 through 5 and 12 through 13. Paul is writing to this discouraged young minister, saying to him, Titus, my loyal child in the faith we share, grace and peace from God the Father and Christ Jesus our Savior. Titus, I left you in Crete for this reason, so that you might mend what is defective. It was said by one of these Cretans, their very own philosopher, said Cretans are always liars and vicious brutes and lazy gluttons. And Titus, this testimony is true. For this reason, rebuke them sharply so that they may become sound in faith. May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. Well, when was it for you that you first discovered that being a Christian is not always easy? That being a message bearer can be hard, can be dangerous? When did you first learn that the church is not perfect? Well, for young Titus, he learned it when he was sent to the island of Crete. And he was discouraged when he got there. He did not like it at all on Crete. And so he wrote a letter to the person who sent him there, to the Apostle Paul. And Paul wrote him a letter back. And that's the letter we read from today. It is one of the books of the Bible. This letter written to this young man who was discouraged in his ministry, discouraged in his faith, discouraged about the people around him, discouraged that his efforts to be a message bearer of God were yielding no fruit. It's a powerful letter. And it's a great letter for us today, especially those of us who find ourselves from time to time discouraged in what we do. You know, Titus had had a good run. He had, before Crete, been at the church in Corinth. And this is actually where we learn a lot about him, is through Paul's letters to the church in Corinth. And we learned there that he had a very successful ministry in Corinth. This was a troubled church. He, with God's help, helped to turn that church around. And they loved him in Corinth. And he loved being in Corinth. He loved them. That's not where he was anymore. He wasn't at his beloved church. Now he was bringing God's message to the people in Crete, and he just wasn't getting along at all there. He did not like the people he was meeting. The Apostle Paul was very upfront about this, saying, as we read today, that one of their own philosophers, one of the people from Crete, said that the Cretans are always liars and evil beasts and lazy gluttons. And Paul said, Titus, that is true. That is the way it seems to us. Us folks who know Greek and were raised in the Greek culture, when we go to Crete, that's the way it feels. And then he says something very important to this young minister. He says to him, Titus, that is why I left you in Crete, so that you might mend what is defective there. That is a powerful message. It was to this young minister 1900 years ago, but it comes ringing down to us today. When times when we are discouraged, because being a message bearer is and can be so hard, so difficult, even dangerous. And here this message comes down to us today. When we are discouraged in some of our very best hopes, some of our longest sought dreams for ourselves, for our faith, for our church, and we are discouraged, here this comes down to us, this message from the Apostle Paul. And we are reminded that nothing in life is perfect. One thing I regret about this, getting this letter, is we don't have the letter that Titus sent to Paul. That would have been a very interesting letter to read, especially for many of the ministers here, to read about the complaints that this young minister had about his church. I can imagine that one thing he would have said is quite simply, Paul, get me out of here. Get me back to Corinth. Timothy is in Corinth. And why don't you send Timothy to Crete and I'll go back to Corinth? Barnabas, he's your assistant. Why don't you send him to Crete? I'll come and I'll be your assistant instead. How about Apollos? Track him down. Send him here. Let me go all around the Mediterranean preaching God's word. That's the message bearer I want to be. That's the mission I want to have. And here we don't have that letter, but here we do have Paul returning his letter back to him saying, nope. No, Titus, that's not the way it's going to be. That will not do. Yes, Crete is difficult. Crete is hard, but that is why I left you there. So that you can bring part of yourself to this situation. So that you can bring the special message that God has set into your heart to these people. You are planted in Crete. So bloom where you are planted. And that's the message that comes down to us today. When we face discouragement, when we face difficulty, when it gets to be hard to be a message bearer, to be able to set this discouragement aside and to be able to bloom where we are planted. We have a wonderful example of that here in our midst today, and here in our region. Reverend Nadine Burton came here to our region as interim regional minister. She was planted here. She planted herself. She was called here to help us through this transition, and we witnessed how she bloomed in that role. We saw how she was called to it. And I know she started getting calls from many, including myself, saying, Nadine, won't you stay? You are blooming here where you are planted, and that is exactly what has happened. An example is someone coming in and blooming, and those blossoms just spread. Carry out, carry around. Others start blooming. Churches start blooming. And that is what we are called to do, to bloom where we are planted. We might not like the school we are at right now, or the grade we are in right now, or the job we have right now. We might not like exactly where our church is in the up and down cycle that the church takes. We might not like these things. We might be discouraged, but we have been called to bloom where we are planted. And so each of us here, we take a look at our lives. We take a look at our faith. We take a look at our disciplines, and we see it's not perfect. It is imperfect. Well, of course it is. But we can make these things what we will with God's help. We can take an inventory of where we are and what we have, and we can begin to bloom where we are planted. I've always enjoyed the story of the peasant back in old days who committed some crime and was sentenced by the king to death. The peasant was crafty, smart, and he came up with a plan to delay his execution. He told the king, give me a year. I will teach your horse how to fly. King didn't have anything to lose. He said, all right, you've got a year. You stay in prison. Every day you get a chance to train my horse. After the course of a year, it'll fly, or it will die. And he was so happy. He was overjoyed. He went back to his prison cell. He was so happy and glad. He told his cellmate. His cellmate said, why are you so happy? You just earned yourself another year in prison. And when that horse doesn't fly at the end of the year, you'll probably be tortured. And then you're going to be killed. Why not just give up right now? The peasant said, oh no. learn how to fly. Well, isn't that the strategy for any of us who are marooned on some creed of our own? Listen, if we give our attention, and if we call on God to inspire us with that youth program, well, then it may fly. With that Sunday school class, then it may fly. With that praise band, then it may fly. With that choir, then that choir may fly. And how about our faith? It's just a little down. Not where it should be. Give that faith our attention. We call on God's presence into our faith. We call God's attention to that. Then that faith, too, can sprout wings and can fly. Today, on the island of Crete, there are many, many churches. And quite a few of those are named after Titus. Because he didn't stay there. He became bishop of Crete. He was planted there in Crete, and he chose to bloom where he was planted. Then perhaps this familiar prayer we can pray together right now will help us, whatever creed we find ourselves in, today or any time in the future. Let us bow together in prayer. God, give me the courage to change that which should be changed, the serenity to accept that which cannot be changed, and the wisdom to know the difference. Loving God, give me the power to bloom where I am planted. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen. Friends,